Mark Carney is now the only leader in the G7 to have plunged his economy into recession.
That statement is factually accurate. Canada has entered a technical recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Statistics Canada confirmed it. The numbers are real. And Pierre Poilievre is correct that no other Group of 7 economy is in the same position right now. But a fact presented without context is not an honest argument. It is a political weapon. And understanding what Poilievre left out of his recession statement tells you far more about the Canadian economy than the single data point he chose to lead with. Canada is in a technical recession, that is true. Canada also has the strongest fiscal position in the Group of 7. Foreign direct investment at a 20-year high. The largest aircraft order in Canadian history signed with an Asian carrier. 20 economic agreements across 5 continents in 12 months. NATO spending at 2.1% for the first time since the Berlin Wall fell. Both sets of facts are true simultaneously. And the question is not whether the recession is real. It is whether Poilievre's explanation of why Canada is in recession, while other Group of 7 countries are not, is honest. Here is the full picture. Start with what a technical recession actually means. Because Poilievre used the word recession 17 times in his statement and never once explained what Statistics Canada actually reported.
There's been 4 quarters since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. The economy shrunk in 3 of those 4 quarters. Canada is the only G7 country for which that is the case. There's now been an entire year of Mark Carney that is recorded in economic data, and the GDP is smaller today than when he took office. That is only true of Canada among G7 countries.
4 quarters, 3 of them negative. GDP smaller than when Carney took office. Those numbers are accurate, and they represent a genuine economic challenge that deserves honest analysis rather than either dismissal or political exploitation. But here is what Poilievre did not say. The 2 consecutive quarters that define the technical recession produced negative growth of 0.2% and 0.1% respectively. Combined, that is approximately 0.3% of contraction, not 0.3% per quarter, total, over 6 months. The smallest technical recession in Canadian economic history by most measures. The journalist who asked about third quarter 2025 growth of 2.6% was making a valid point. The quarters that define this technical recession bracket a period of genuine growth. The sequencing produced the 2 consecutive negative readings that trigger the technical definition, not a sustained economic contraction of the kind Poilievre's language implied. That does not mean the economic challenges are not real. Household debt at the highest level in the Group of 7 is real. Delinquency rates rising are real. Food inflation being the worst in the Group of 7 is real. Those things deserve serious policy attention. But a 0.3% combined contraction over 6 months is not the full-blown recession that produced the unemployment and food bank numbers Poilievre cited. Those problems have structural roots that predate Carney by years, and conflating them with a technical recession defined by the smallest possible margin does not serve Canadians who are genuinely struggling. Now for the question at the heart of Poilievre's argument. If global factors and tariffs are affecting every Group of 7 country, why is Canada the only one in recession?
Canada is projected to have the 2nd fastest growth in the G7 this year and next. We already have the strongest fiscal position in the G7, and we're reinforcing that advantage by cutting 10% of the federal civil service, 20% of our spending on consultants, and reducing the annual growth of operational spending from over 8% per year, which is where it's been for the past 10 years, to less than 2%, which is where it's been since I came into government and where it will stay.
Poilievre's question deserves a direct answer. If France, Italy, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States all have the same tariffs and the same global factors, why is Canada the only one in recession? The answer is that they do not all have the same tariffs and the same global factors. They have very different exposures to the specific pressure that is weighing most heavily on the Canadian economy right now. Canada sends approximately 77% of its goods exports to the United States. No other Group of Seven country has that level of dependence on a single bilateral trading relationship. France, Italy, and Germany export heavily to each other and to the broader European Union. Japan exports across Asia and to the United States, but its domestic consumption base provides significant buffer. The United Kingdom has its own economic challenges, but its service economy is far less exposed to American goods tariffs than Canadian manufacturing. When the United States applies tariffs specifically targeting Canadian steel, aluminum, automotive products, and lumber, the impact on the Canadian economy is structurally different from the impact on economies whose exports are more diversified. Canada's exposure is concentrated. The pain is concentrated, and the technical recession reflects that concentration. Poilievre's argument implies that every Group of Seven leader except Carney managed to navigate the same pressures successfully. The reality is that every Group of Seven leader except Carney is managing a fundamentally different exposure profile to American tariff policy. The question is not why Canada is affected. It is how Canada is responding, and that is where the story gets more complicated than Poilievre's statement allowed. Now for the numbers Poilievre chose not to include in his recession statement. Because a complete picture of the Canadian economy right now looks very different from the one he presented.
We're creating new opportunities for Canadian businesses through more than 20 economic and security partnerships that we've signed on 5 continents in less than a year. We're working towards concluding comprehensive free trade agreements with India, with Thailand, the Philippines, Mercosur, and above all, ASEAN this year. Foreign direct investment into Canada is already at its highest level in nearly 2 decades. It's running at twice the rate on a per capita basis as our nearest G7 competitor. And we're just getting started.
Twice the rate per capita, compared to every other major economy in the Group of Seven, including the United States. Poilievre cited a figure of $1.9 billion of investment leaving Canada in the first 4 quarters under Carney. The foreign direct investment data Carney cited at Mirabel tells a different story. Both sets of numbers can be technically accurate while measuring different things. Investment flows are volatile quarter to quarter. The trend line matters more than any single data point. And the trend line on foreign direct investment, confirmed by the International Monetary Fund, by the World Bank Infrastructure Investment Rankings, and by the actual commercial decisions of companies like AirAsia, Panasonic, ENI, Saab, and Luxembourg's critical mineral investors, points in a direction that Poilievre's statement ignored entirely. The largest aircraft order in Canadian history, the world's largest graphite mine in the Group of Seven breaking ground, 56 critical mineral agreements unlocking $18 billion in investment, the Saab Global Eye Partnership establishing Canadian production capacity, the France Quantum Agreement, Luxembourg committing to Canadian supply chains. These are not announcements. They are signed contracts, commercial commitments measured in billions, made by sophisticated foreign investors who ran their own due diligence and chose Canada, a country that is attracting the world's most cost-disciplined airline for the largest aircraft order in its history, is not a country whose investment story is defined by the net flows in the most recent 4 quarters. It is a country in transition, whose investment architecture is being rebuilt faster than the quarterly statistics can capture. Now for the question that Poilievre's recession statement does not answer. What would he actually do differently? And would it produce better outcomes for the Canadians he cited?
The U.S. has changed, and we must respond. Canada Strong is our plan to build Canada by Canadians for Canadians. It will attract new investment so we can build more for ourselves, striking new partnerships abroad so we can sell into new markets. It's about taking back control of our security, our borders, and our future. There are some who say there's no need for a comprehensive plan. They believe we should wait it out in the hope that the United States will return to normal, that the good old days will come back. But hope isn't a plan, and nostalgia is not a strategy.
Hope isn't a plan. That line was directed at those who believed waiting out the tariff conflict was the right strategy. It applies equally to the argument that the solution to Canada's current economic challenges is simply to reverse liberal policies and get government out of the way. Poilievre's prescription is internally consistent as a philosophy: less regulation, lower taxes, faster permits, more market freedom. These are coherent policy positions that have genuine intellectual foundations and genuine evidence of working in specific contexts. But they do not answer the specific challenge Canada faces right now. The tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and automotive products are not caused by Canadian regulation. They cannot be solved by Canadian deregulation. A Canadian government that eliminates the carbon tax, cuts permitting timelines, and reduces corporate taxes tomorrow morning still wakes up the day after facing the same American tariffs on the same Canadian exports. Poilievre proposed a tariff-free auto deal with the United States based on the 1965 Auto Pact. He said Carney has been nowhere and done nothing while Mexico eats Canada's lunch at the negotiating table. That criticism about Mexico's progress in CUSMA negotiations is legitimate and worth taking seriously. But the Auto Pact proposal has been made. Carney said Fortress North America is on the table. Washington has not taken it. That is not because Carney failed to show up. It is because Washington is negotiating with China first and managing its domestic political constraints second. The timeline is not set by Ottawa. The 2.2 million Canadians relying on food banks deserve honest answers about what policy would actually help them. Not the recession that predates Carney, but the structural affordability crisis that has been building for 15 years. Poilievre named the problem accurately. He did not answer it honestly. 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, the only Group of 7 country in technical recession. Poilievre's number is accurate. His explanation is incomplete. Canada is in a technical recession defined by the smallest possible margin, 0.3% combined contraction over 6 months, produced by a concentration of exposure to American tariff pressure that no other Group of 7 economy shares at the same scale. At the same time, Canada has the strongest fiscal position in the Group of 7. Foreign direct investment at a 20-year high, the largest aircraft order in its history, 20 trade agreements across 5 continents. NATO spending met for the first time since the Berlin Wall fell. Both of those pictures are real. The question is not which one to believe. It is what they tell you together about what is actually happening and what the right policy response is. Poilievre's recession statement chose one picture and ignored the other. That is a political speech, not an economic analysis. Canadians who are genuinely struggling with food prices, with mortgage delinquencies, with job losses, deserve both pictures. Because the decisions being made right now about pipelines and trade agreements and defense procurement and housing construction will determine which picture defines Canada's economy for the next decade. The recession is real. The context matters. And anyone who tells you one without the other is not giving you the full story. Stay with this channel for the analysis that gives you both.